Hey there guys, Portal Master here, and today I am going to be talking about Lightseekers. This is another episode of the brief history of Toys to Life, and today we're going to be tackling the strangest beast of any Toys to Life game. That would be Lightseekers. I don't think anyone will argue that this one is one of the most unconventional Toys to Life games, and with that little piece of exposition, let's dive right in. Before we go though, I should mention this is going to be a two-part episode. I will have one up this week and one up next week talking a little bit more about Lightseekers. I wanted to give a little bit of exposition this week and talk about why Lightseekers was such a failure next week. So let's get into this. Lightseekers was originally introduced in 2016. September of 2016, that is. In October of 2016, they launched a Kickstarter seeking funding for their newest project. Lightseekers was created by PlayFusion, and PlayFusion was a studio that was founded by Mark Gerhard. Now, you may or may not know who that is. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, but he used to be the CEO of Jagex. Jagex is the company responsible for making RuneScape, and as far as I understand, the CEO was not the most well-liked CEO during his time there by the community that was playing RuneScape, but at the very least, that is where I was able to find the most information about this guy. So it seems like PlayFusion would have been very well funded, yet they still did a Kickstarter, which to this day really confuses me. Lightseekers was interesting because it wasn't just advertised as a Toys to Life game with these little figures. That was not where Lightseekers was supposed to stop. It was going to be an entire ecosystem. There were going to be trading cards, and there were trading cards. There was going to be merchandise such as comic books and t-shirts and other things that would all give you bonuses in the game. Most of that, actually all of that except the card game, never came to fruition because it was such an ambitious project for what was effectively an indie studio. But at the very least, it is what was planned, and at the time, it sounded like a really fun concept. The game itself, which was supposed to be the highlight of this entire experience, was advertised as an action RPG, most similar to a game such as like Diablo or World of Warcraft, maybe somewhere in between those two types of games. The combat system was probably a little bit more akin to something like Diablo, whereas the quest system was much more akin to something like World of Warcraft. The idea was it would be an semi-open world, not really open world, but kind of like a linear world with a lot of branching paths that you could explore that would have all types of quests, adventures. There'd be a ton of different types of characters you could run into, and each character was supposed to be a very distinct experience. See, in Skylanders, you could swap characters on the fly and continue on your mission. Well, that is not what Lightseekers was going to be. Lightseekers was a system where you could pick your starting character, Korra the Mari, Boulder the Everrock, and play through the entire game as that character. You could not switch on the fly, which is very confusing considering that this was a Toys to Life game. So essentially, you would be buying a new character slot whenever you bought a new figure. That was kind of the idea. Now you could have 3 different playthroughs with 3 different instances of Korra the Mari, but at the end of the day, if you wanted to play with Boulder the Everrock, you had to start the game all over again just to play with this guy. That was a horrible idea, and I'm going to expand more in that in the second part of the video. Let's talk a little bit more about the Kickstarter. In October of 2016, the Kickstarter was officially started, and the goal was to raise $200,000. Eventually, the project was successfully funded with $225,000 in funding total, which is a lot of money, but it did barely surpass the goal of $200,000. And for those of you who don't know how Kickstarter works, if a franchise does not reach its required funding goal, it gets none of that. So if Lightseekers had only received $190,000 in funding, they would not have gotten any money. So instead, they ended up just barely over the line and got all of the money instead. That's just a little bit of a thing we'll talk again more about in part 2, but you need to know that that happened. Personally, I backed this Kickstarter at the Pioneer Pack level, so it was like a $50 or $60 commitment, and I got an entire starter pack. And what the starter pack consisted of is, I can't remember if it was Jax or if it was Korra that I got from the starter pack. I think it was Korra. I think I got Korra the Mari, and I got a fusion core, and I got a weapon. Now, for those of you that don't know what a fusion core is, it is essentially the brains of these different toys. So Korra right now is a lifeless piece of plastic. But if I take one of the fusion cores that is attached right now to Jax the Tire Axe, you can see he's lighting up, he's talking, and everything. I can switch this off, if I can get it, I'll switch this off. I can pull the fusion core right out of Jax, and I can put it right into Korra. And now, when I put it in her, and I turn on the fusion core, there you go. Now she's alive. Now she is a playable character. So the fusion core was the brains of each toy. And the idea behind this was that each toy was lifeless and did not need a processor attached to it. But by selling a fusion core, you could attach the processor into the figure. It was supposed to be a money-saving thing, but it didn't really work because these things were still like $40 to buy on their own. The fusion core by itself was like $35. So essentially, if you wanted to have two different toys going at the same time, you had to buy two separate fusion cores, which cost like $35. Is that worth it? It's probably not. The entire thing was so overpriced, and that is definitely a contributing factor to why this game did the way it did. Going forward in the Lightseekers timeline, in February of 2017, I was put in contact with the creators of this game, and I received a prototype of Jax the Tyrax. Well, when I got that prototype, it was golden, and I eventually had to get rid of it. I never fully understood why I had to like throw it away and destroy it and stuff like that. But anyway, it granted me access to the beta version of the game. Now, when I got the beta version, I was not allowed to talk about it, and considering that I'm not really up to date on how NDAs work, I'm not going to say a lot about it, but let's just say the original prototype of the game was very, very barren. There was not a lot to do, and that's understandable because it was the beta. But see, here's the thing. As time went on and I was able to eventually get into the open beta that I can talk about, let me just say it wasn't much better. At the end of it all, there was maybe only 20 hours that you could really spend in this game before getting completely burned out, which is not what was advertised at all. It was supposed to be this extremely expansive open world, semi-open world experience that you could really like dig your feet into. You could get a ton of content out of, and that never happened. And it's because of a laundry list of reasons that I'll discuss in part 2. The original release of Lightseekers saw the release of Korra the Mari, Jax the Tyrax, and a couple of weapons. It saw like one-handed weapon, I think, or no, it was two one-handed weapons, and it was for each one. So there were two tech one-handed weapons and two water one-handed weapons. Eventually they released the flight packs. I think they were out at launch 2, and then eventually Wave 2 toys came out. That introduced a lava and an undead, or whatever it was called, flight pack, as well as a one-handed weapon, and it also introduced tech and water shields, which I think Xyrus has my water shield right now. Yeah, so that's what was released. And then eventually, in December of 2017, they released Boulder and Xyrus. And these two characters were definitely implemented into the game, but they were not as well designed, I think a lot of people will say, as Korra and as Jax. So, you know, it's an interesting situation. Plus, you had to start your game all over if you wanted to experience these guys. While the game was short, the game was very robust. It had a very in-depth equipment system. You could customize your characters, you could customize your gear, you could equip different things to your gear. It was really awesome, and as you attached new things to your gear, the lights glowing on their weapons would change. It was such a cool concept, and they completely blew it. The customization that was present in Lightseekers is without a doubt unparalleled with other Toys to Life games. Skylanders only ever came close with the Imaginators, and even then, the amount of complexity that could be dumped into these characters, the amount of customization you had was unparalleled. These guys were seriously very in-depth. There was nothing holding this game back from being an absolute mechanical success, but ultimately there are so many things that shot this game in the foot. It was an amazing game, there was so much depth and complexity, but ultimately it just wasn't there. Things didn't fall into place, and there are so many broken promises from that Kickstarter. One of the biggest things to me from this Kickstarter that really stuck out to me as such a huge broken promise is this game was a mobile-only game. It was only released on mobile devices, Android, iOS, etc. Eventually, there were plans to release it on the PC, though, and a lot of people backed a lot of money on this Kickstarter to get beta access to the PC version. This did not happen. There has never been a PC version of Lightseekers. The game was turned into a skeleton of its former self. They stopped development on it before they ever got a PC version. I am so glad I did not back at this level. And while they did offer some form of compensation, I don't remember what it was, for those who backed at the PC level, that would just make me so angry if I had backed this game and expected a PC version. There were people, I think, that backed at like the level I did and got a starter pack expecting a PC version, not necessarily backing at the level to get beta access to it, and then there was never a PC version. They never got access to this game. It is such a horrible situation, and it's honestly one of the worst things that can happen in a Kickstarter. Honestly, I'm just glad they at least delivered these toys. Talking more about the toys, they were released through a partnership with Tomy, and Tomy secured them a exclusive deal with Toys R Us, and then, you know, Toys R Us went bankrupt like a year later. But it doesn't matter, because these toys never sold. When I went to my Toys R Us when it was going bankrupt in 2018, the entire stock of Lightseekers stuff that was there the day it was released was still there. People did not buy Lightseekers. There was no publicity that was ever received for Lightseekers. They never did any advertising, at least not ever that I saw, and ultimately, this is just such a mismanaged project, and we're going to talk all about how this project was so horribly mismanaged in the next video. Now, as an outsider looking in, I'm sure there's a lot of things that I'm going to get wrong, but from an outsider's perspective, I can at least tell you some of the obvious things that they did wrong and explain why I think this was such an utter disaster. And it's such a shame, too, because look at this thing. This is such an amazing toy. This is amazing. There is no doubt to the quality of this thing right here, and it's a complete waste of plastic to me now. I spent hundreds of dollars on this Lightseekers stuff, and I have a skeleton of a Lightseekers game to show for it. This isn't so much me saying, you know, I'm so annoyed as a backer, because like at least I got the cool toys, and I mean at this point I probably wouldn't even be playing the game anyway. But it is games like this that I think give Kickstarter such a bad reputation, and I could go on and on and on about this. And it's ultimately such a tragedy that this is how Lightseekers had to go. I'm sorry the end of this video turned into such a rant, but stay tuned for next time, because if you want to hear me rant some more about why Lightseekers and actually explain why Lightseekers did like this, then stay tuned, because I'm going to be back next week. So that's about it. I think I've formally introduced Lightseekers to you guys. I think you understand what went on with Lightseekers, and hopefully you'll stay tuned next week to hear me ramble on some more about why Lightseekers was such a train wreck. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been Portal Master. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. Stay tuned, because like I said, next week, the next video in this series is coming out talking about Lightseekers. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you guys next time.